Very lovely to be with you. It's really great to be celebrating Dharma Day with you on this particularly special Dharma Day. We were hearing from Amara Pushpa a little moment ago about after the Buddha gained enlightenment, he had this doubt, if you like, of whether to teach the Dharma, whether to try and teach the Dharma. So it's said that he reflected, this Dharma that I've discovered is deep. It's hard to see, hard to understand, peaceful and sublime, not within the sphere of reasoning, subtle, to be experienced by the wise. But this generation is devoted to things to which they cling and delight therein. For them it is hard to see conditionality, it's hard to see the Dharma. Nirvana is also hard for them to see. So he reflected on how difficult it would be to communicate what he'd experienced. And indeed, he went as far as thinking, we're told, that, well, other people wouldn't understand, and it'd be a bit of a bother, frankly. It'd be wearisome and troublesome to try and teach the Dharma, another thing. However, as we heard, luckily, Brahma Sahampati entreated him. He entreated him because he said, well, some people will understand, some people will get it. But also because he suggested in the nearby city of Magadha, there were people holding wrong views that were causing them suffering. So in other words, the ideas, the views that they were holding were causing them suffering, and this could be alleviated by communication of the Dharma. So it's then that the Buddha had this vision of the pool of lotuses that again we heard about from Amara Pushpa. And he said to Brahma Sahampati, open to them are the doors to the deathless. Let those who have ears release faith. In other words, I am going to teach the Dharma. I am going to make the Dharma available. And he decided to go and teach 5 former friends, the 5 ascetics, who'd left him. They'd abandoned him because they thought he was a bit of a slacker because he stopped fasting and was having a bowl of rice milk. And they considered that the height of luxury. So they abandoned him. And so the Buddha goes off to near Varanasi to find his former 5 friends. And they see him coming in the distance and they think, oh, it's that slacker, we're not going to do anything about him. No, let's just ignore him. But they're so moved and impressed by his appearance, his radiance, his demeanour, that they can't help themselves but respond to him, and they do the traditional things of making the seat ready and offering him water and so on. And then they get into a relationship, or re-establish a relationship, and the Buddha starts teaching them what he's understood. And we don't know how long this goes on for, maybe some weeks, but at a certain point, one of them, Kendanya, finally gets what the Buddha is going on about, and this is what it says. So, elated, the bhikkhus of the group of 5 delighted in the Blessed One's teachings. And while this explanation was being spoken, there arose in the Venerable Kendanya the dust-free, stainless Dharma eye. Whatever is patterned with an origination, all that is patterned with a cessation. And when the wheel of Dharma had been set in motion by the Blessed One, the earth-dwelling Devas raised a cry. At Varanasi, in the deer park at Isipatana, the unsurpassed wheel of the Dharma has been set in motion by the Blessed One, which cannot be stopped by any renunciant or Brahman or Mara or Brahma or by anyone in the world. having heard the cry, the earth-dwelling Devas, the Devas of the 4 great kings raised the same cry. Having heard it, the 33 Devas took it up, then the Yama Devas, then the contented Devas, then the Devas who delight in creating, then the Devas who delight in the creation of others, and then the Devas of the Brahma group. Thus, at that moment, at that instant, at that second, the cry spread as far as the Brahma world, and this 10,000-fold world shook, quaked and trembled, and an immeasurable glorious radiance appeared in the world, surpassing the divine majesty of the Devas. Then the Blessed One, uttering this inspired utterance, the Honourable Kandanya has indeed understood. The Honourable Kandanya has indeed understood. In this way, the Venerable Kandanya acquired the name Kandanya, who has understood. So Kandanya got it. He understood the Dharma that the Buddha had realised, and the universe responded. All the whole hierarchy of Devas, a big shout went up all the way to the highest level, and you get this wonderful radiance, and the earth shakes. So in a way, what it's trying to do is really underline the significance of this moment. So this was the original Dharma Day that we're now celebrating 2,500 years later. The first, in a way, the Dharma, when the Buddha became enlightened, well, that was the first enlightened person in the world, as far as we understand. But in a way, the Dharma wasn't really the Dharma until it had been communicated. The enlightenment wasn't complete until it had been communicated to somebody else. And that's what happened on this day 2,500 years ago. And so then it's been passed on from the Buddha right down to the present day. So we're heirs to that. We're heirs to that event that happened all those 2,500 years ago in India. We're heirs to that event. There's been a whole lineage, or lineages in plural, that have come down through the ages of people practicing the Dharma, teaching the Dharma, which has resulted us sitting in this room, practicing the Dharma, hearing about the Dharma. So what does that lineage consist in, or lineages? So in 2008, Bhante Sangharachita was doing a question of answers with the College of Public Preceptors that Machinara referred to before my time, before I was part of the college. And he said that we have 3, or you could say 4 lineages. So those lineages are the lineage of teaching, the lineage of practices, the lineage of inspiration, and then he said, well, you could also say there's a 4th one, which he called the organisation or institutional lineage, which later became called the lineage of responsibility. So I'm just going to go through those 4 lineages. So first of all, the lineage of teaching. So the lineage of teaching is the framework, the dharmic framework that has been passed on to us. So when we talk about the word Dharma, well, it can have a number of different meanings, but the 2 principal meanings are the Dharma as truth that can't be put into words that's being realised, and the teaching, or in other words, the sort of conceptualisation of that realisation. And we sometimes speak in terms of letter and meaning. So the letter being the doctrines, the lists, the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, etc. And then what they're pointing to, the actual meaning, the realisation which is beyond words. And both are important. So it's a bit like, those of you familiar with the Bodhicharyavatara will know that sometimes the bodhicitta is likened to mercury, to quicksilver. So you know what mercury is like. If it's, as it were, let loose, it just shoots all over the place. But if it's contained in a thermometer, then it's very useful for reading temperature, for example. but it needs to be contained to have that function. So analogously, you could say that the Dharma as realization needs a vessel for communication, which is the doctrine. So, in other words, to communicate any sort of realization to someone else, we need to use words. So we need the teachings, but also actually even to communicate with ourselves, we need a kind of framework to hang it on. If we have, you may have had this experience of, for example, going on a retreat and having something of a realization happen to you, but if you don't put it into words in some way, you'll tend to lose it. So it's the words sort of help to be a sort of peg to hang it on, so that you can then revisit it at a later time and even perhaps deepen it. So when, in this event 2,500 years ago, Kundanya got it, so Kundanya knows, the Buddha had used words, used explanations, and Kundanya had gained the realization. So he gained this thing that's beyond words, but through the medium of words. So it's important that that medium is clear, and that's why we strongly emphasize study. It's important that we're conceptually clear about the Dharma. In fact, in some traditions, particularly in some of the Tibetan traditions, Tibetan monastic traditions, they don't let you loose on meditation before you've had years and years and years of study, just because it can go horribly wrong if you start having meditative experiences, but without a correct conceptual framework. So that's teaching. The second thing we have practices. So for most of us, just hearing the conceptual formulation's not going to be enough. It was for Kundanya, and it seems to happen all over in the Pali Canon, but we're not living in the Pali Canon, unfortunately. It happened to Bhante when he read the Diamond Sutra. He had a realization based on that. But for most of us, we need to put in a bit more work. So that's what we have practices. So we need to reflect on the Dharma. We need to meditate. And in our lineage, of course, we have a whole set of practices, including the mindfulness of breathing, the metta bhavana, just sitting, when you're ordained, the 6 element practice, sadhana. And also practices such as friendship, such as the arts, such as work as a spiritual practice. Speaking this morning, I met up with someone who's not been that long working at Padmaloka, the retreat centre in Norfolk, where I trained for ordination, and he was saying he's realised actually work is really good for his spiritual life. Like, he'd really rather not. He'd really rather just sort of, he's got an idea that he'd just like to meditate all the time, but he knows that actually when he does a lot of meditation, he just gets a bit bored of looking at his mind, and actually needs a discipline of work, which then means that when he does meditate, it can be more fruitful. So we have a whole set of practices that have come down to us, and that, of course, needs to fit within the Dharmic framework, and then, of course, we need to put those into practices as wholeheartedly as we can. So we've got this whole lineage, a whole set of different practices, a very broad, in a way, set of practices. And then thirdly, inspiration. So of course, we do need to be inspired. If we're not inspired, we probably won't bother to study or, meditate, even though we might know, intellectually it's a really good idea, but hey, there's a great Netflix series on. So we need to be inspired, and what that means is we need to be able to recognise what inspires us and then guard those sources of inspiration, make sure we set up the conditions that keep us inspired. But in a way that this lineage of inspiration is saying something a bit more than just keeping inspired. the lineage, of course, is talking about something being passed on. That's why it's a lineage. And you could say that what is passed on to us is the indefinable spirit of the order and movement of True Ratna. And Bhante suggested that we might particularly experience this at our private ordination, should we have been ordained or should we be ordained at some point in the future. So in a way, at that moment when you enter the order, you're being recognised as having committed to True Ratna, something mysterious happens, and you could say that's a transmission. Apparently, Bhante told Suvajra when he handed on the order, Maichanara was referring to this handing on the headship of the order, which was the start of the College of Public Preceptors. He said that after he'd handed it on, whatever had come through him to found the order had left him. And he said that he felt like an old fakir, that is like a Sufi ascetic. So it's a Sufi ascetic that's particularly associated with spiritual poverty. So again, quite sort of interesting, this idea that something, Bhante said in a number of places that he didn't feel that he founded the order. He felt like something came through him that enabled him to found the order, that the order was founded through him. And then he passed that on, and afterwards he felt, spiritually poor. Fortunately, it came back, but for a while, apparently that's how he felt. And he suggested that, in a way, for this lineage to be extant, in a way, it particularly needs personal contact. That's why it's so great that we're here together, gathering together in person. That's why Sangha is so important. And I think there is something particular about meeting in person. It's so great that when we're not having to meet all the time online anymore, which is useful. But I think there is something more and something particular about the vividness of actually meeting in person that enables the possibility of this tradition, this lineage, to pass through. Well, it's often said that the Dharma is caught rather than taught, and I think that's right. And Maichanara was mentioning my friend Paramabandhu, and when he, on his very first day to the London Buddhist Centre, he knew that he was going to commit his life to this. Don't know how. I didn't have that experience, but anyway, he did. But anyway, there's something that's not uncommon there about people catching a spirit right from very early on. Sometimes people say that they walked through the doors of the Buddhist Centre, whichever Buddhist centre it was, and they felt like they'd come home. Of course, doesn't happen to everybody, but it's not an uncommon thing. And I think it is something about catching that spirit, that something is transmitted, even at that very initial moment sometimes, if not, of course, later on in one's involvement. So then, fourthly, there's the lineage of responsibility, which, as I mentioned, originally called the organisation or institution. So, actually, even in the Buddhist day, there needed to be some kind of organisation. Certainly, once the Sangha started growing, there needed to be some way of organising when the wandering mendicants came together, and slowly they developed quite a complex Vinaya set of regulations in a way to govern how to act together, and also what to do when somebody acted unskillfully. And for example, there's to me a rather lovely example of Dabba. So Dabba, who apparently gained enlightenment when he was 8, very precocious, it wouldn't be allowed now, it'd be safeguarding issues, but anyway, he was the preferred guest master. So he would organise when people were coming to stay in a little settlement, or sort of, wherever they were, kind of proto-monastery. They probably didn't have proper full-blown monasteries like later days, in the time of the Buddha. He would be the one, and people would be really pleased to see him, because he had mastery of the fire element. And apparently, what he'd do is he'd show people to their accommodation through a little flame from the tip of his finger, go around lighting the way. I don't know if you've had this experience in somewhere like India, but when it's dark, it's very dark. It's like, I can't remember where I was, one of the places when I was on pilgrimage, and like after a certain time, no electricity. So it's like very, very dark. So you really need Dabba's finger to help you find your way back. So yes, even in those days they had organisation. And after the Buddha's death, they first of all had a council where they talked, they went through all the teachings and so on, and there were a number of councils after the Buddha's death. So in other words, what this lineage is about is we need structures that enable the flow of the three lineages. So we need centres like this, we need classes, we need retreats and so on, to allow the lineages to flow. And if we're going to have that structure, then we need people to take responsibility for them. So we need people to do that. And of course, for a centre, the overall, it's not the only person taking responsibility for a centre, but the overall responsibility is taken by the chair. So of course it's a very important day that we've got today, when we've got a handover of chairs. Viryanaga has of course been a wonderful chair, would be a very hard act to follow, dare I say. And really enabled the the Sangha to flourish in Brixton. So because it's the chair who holds that overall responsibility, it's really, really important that we, as best we can, support the chair. Because the chair is partly, of course, the chair does various functions, just organisational and so on functions. But it's kind of like a sort of, it's an archetypal role. It holds a sort of archetypal weight, if you like, being a chair. It's a figurehead, if you like, for the centre, a sort of focus of energy for the centre that really enables the centre to function, assuming you've got a good chair, which we have. So it's really important we support the chair, and I hope we'll support the new chair when we hopefully have a new chair in the not too distant future. So those are the four lineages, and we really do need to have confidence in those lineages. It's a particular, any tradition is going to be particular to that tradition. It needs to be to cohere together. If we have a pick and mix approach to the Dharma life, a bit of Sufi dancing thrown in, I'm sure Sufi dancing's fine, but if we take a pick and mix approach, in a way it's going to limit our progress. We need to commit to a particular tradition. And if we don't have confidence in the lineages, it's going to inhibit or prevent our spiritual growth. There's a sutta called the Chetokila Sutta, and in the Chetokila Sutta it talks about 5 wildernesses of the heart. I find that a very, very evocative phrase. Wilderness is of the heart. And the first of the 4 of those are having doubt. First of all, having doubt in the teacher, by which is meant principally the Buddha, but also in our case, Bhante is the founder of our tradition. Doubt in the Dharma, that's the second one. Doubt in the Sangha, that's the third one. And fourth is doubt in the training. In other words, in the particular presentation of the Dharma that we have, which, as I said, a particular presentation needs to hang together, it needs to cohere, otherwise it just won't work, it won't function. It'll be like a sort of, having something in the spanner in the works, as it were. So that's the first four. And then the fifth one, the fifth wilderness of the heart, is being angry and displeased with our companions in the holy life. So in other words, if we have an unrealistic expectations, or if we just can't get on with our companions in the spiritual life, it's going to, in a way, it's going to get in the way, it's going to distract us, it's going to prevent us from practicing the Dharma. So if we do experience any of those kind of doubts, we need to take that very seriously. They are wildernesses of the heart. We need to find ways to overcome them. So, doubts can be of different kinds. So doubts can sometimes be like, I just don't understand, in which case we need to get some clarification, whether that's simply we just need to reflect on it ourselves, whether we need to ask questions of other people, people more experienced. But of course, doubt is also a hindrance, which is primarily to do with a lack of emotional positivity. If we have a habit of going into fault finding or blaming, that's going to create doubt and create problems for us. It's often associated, of course, with a lack of metta, both metta towards ourselves and metta towards our other people, which is why the metta bhavana is such an important practice. So yes, we need to overcome these doubts, otherwise we'll be in this barren place, this wilderness, and it won't allow the lineages that are actually raining down all the time upon us to come down and bless us, because that's what they do. So, yeah, it's very important we try and have confidence in our lineages. They're very precious. They are the means to liberation. The Buddha, if you remember, he said, was saying after he decided that he would teach, he said, "Open are the doors to the deathless." And we could say that these lineages are what enable us to walk through that door. Okay.